The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly buzzed with the sounds of 100 different species. Captain Jake Morrison adjusted his dark blue uniform and checked his notes one last time. He had been Earth's representative for 15 years now, and he knew every voice in this room. The clicking of Zephyrian mandibles, the low hums of the gas-breathing Vorthak, the musical tones of the crystal beings from Altair Prime Dot today felt different, though. The air seemed heavier, more charged with tension than usual. Jake could see it in the way the other delegates moved, the way they avoided his eyes when he walked to his seat in the human section. Ambassador Linda Hayes sat beside him, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had tried for months to make them understand. The Hegemony Coalition wanted human colony worlds, and they were not interested in fair deals. Linda had offered trade agreements, technology sharing, even joint military exercises. Nothing worked. They think we are weak, Linda whispered to Jake as the session began. 200 years of peace, and they see it as weakness. Jake nodded but said nothing. He watched as the assembly speaker, a tall insect-like being from Kepler-7, called the session to order. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Today we address the final territorial proposal from the human delegation, the speaker announced. The words echoed off the curved walls of the chamber. Representative Morrison, you may present your position. Jake stood up slowly. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His brown hair showed touches of gray at the temples, and his blue eyes were calm but alert. He had done this hundreds of times before, but never had the stakes been so high. Honored delegates, Jake began, his voice clear and steady. Earth offers the following terms for the disputed colonies in the Outer Rim sectors. We will share mining rights on 3 worlds, establish joint research stations on 2 others, and provide full trade access through our shipping routes. He paused and looked around the chamber. Some delegates seemed interested, but others were already shaking their heads or making dismissive gestures. In return, Jake continued, we ask only that our existing settlements remain under human governance and that our citizens be allowed to live in peace. The Zephyrian delegate, a creature that looked like a cross between a mantis and a Volf, rose from his seat. His name was Klexther, and he had been pushing for this confrontation for months. The human proposal is inadequate, Klexther said, his words coming out as sharp clicks and hisses that the translators converted to standard galactic speech. The Outer Rim worlds contain resources that belong to the galaxy, not to one species. Humans have held these worlds for too long. Several other delegates voiced their agreement. The Hegemony Coalition controlled nearly a third of the assembly votes, and they had been building support for weeks. Jake remained standing, his expression unchanged. The colonies were settled legally under galactic law. Our people have lived there for over 50 years. They have built homes, schools, entire communities. Then they can relocate, said another voice from the Hegemony section. The galaxies. Needs come before the comfort of colonists. Linda Hayes stood up beside Jake. Her face was red with anger, but she kept her voice controlled. We are talking about 2 million human beings. Men, women, children who have never known any other home. You cannot simply erase them? No one speaks of erasing anyone, Klexther replied smoothly. We speak of relocation, compensation. The humans will be treated fairly. Jake looked at Linda, then back at the assembly. He had expected this, but it still hurt to hear. After 2 centuries of cooperation, of helping to settle disputes and sharing their technology freely, this was how the galaxy saw them, as obstacles to be moved aside. We have made our offer, Jake said quietly. It is fair and reasonable. It protects both human interests and galactic needs. Your offer is rejected, the speaker announced after a brief consultation with the Hegemony. Leadership. The Assembly votes to proceed with mandatory relocation of human settlements in the disputed sectors. Compensation will be provided according to standard protocols. The chamber erupted in noise as delegates began talking among themselves. Some seemed pleased with the decision, others looked uncomfortable. A few species that had worked closely with humans over the years appeared genuinely upset. Jake gathered his papers and data tablets with slow, careful movements. Linda was still arguing with nearby delegates, her voice rising as she tried to make them understand what they were doing. But Jake knew it was over. The decision had been made long before today's session. He touched Linda's arm gently. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We are leaving," Jake said simply. "Jake, we can appeal this. There are other options. We can take it to the High Council or—" "No," Jake said firmly. "We are leaving, now." He started, walking toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber. Other delegates turned to watch him go, some with curiosity, others with satisfaction at getting their way. "Representative Morrison," Klexter called out. "Where are you going? We must discuss the details of implementation." Jake stopped at the wide doorway that led out of the chamber. He turned around one last time, looking at the faces of beings he had worked with for 15 years. Some had been friends, or as close to friends as different species could be. Others had been rivals but respectful ones. Now they were all just voices that had voted against his people. "Home," Jake said simply. He walked through the doorway and did not look back. Behind him, the assembly chamber slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation, but something had changed. The easy relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy was over. Linda Hayes caught up with Jake in the corridor outside. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake was already activating his communicator, sending coded messages back to Earth Command. "Now we tell our people to come home, all of them." As they walked toward the transport bay, neither of them spoke again. There was nothing left to say. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humanity would make theirs. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days after the assembly vote. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a human biochemist working on joint research at the Vega Science Station, simply did not show up for work. Her Alteran colleague Nexhi found her lab cleaned out and her equipment neatly packed away. There was no goodbye message. No forwarding address, no explanation at all. Just an empty lab and a resignation letter that said only personal reasons require my immediate return to Earth. Within a week, similar reports came in from across the galaxy. Human scientists, traders, diplomats, and cultural exchange students were all leaving their posts. They'd packed their belongings quietly, completed their current projects where possible, and departed without ceremony. Senator Paul Clark of the Andromeda Coalition had worked with humans for 20 years. He considered Admiral Kate Sullivan a close friend, someone he could call when problems needed solving or when he just wanted to talk to another being who understood the weight of leadership. When Paul tried to reach Kate on the secure diplomatic channel they had used for years, he got only an automated message. "Thank you for your communication. Due to policy changes, this channel is no longer monitored. Please direct all future correspondence through official galactic channels." Paul tried the official channels. They led to more automated responses, all polite but final. The humans were not accepting calls, not responding to messages, not participating in any form of galactic communication. The Hegemony Coalition celebrated it first. Klexter held a public ceremony on Zephyr Prime, declaring the vote a great victory for galactic unity. "The humans have shown their true nature," he announced to the gathered crowd. "When challenged, they run away like frightened children. This proves they were never worthy of the territories they claimed." Many species agreed with this assessment. The humans had always seemed too peaceful, too willing to compromise. In a galaxy where strength determined worth, their diplomatic approach had made them appear weak, but not everyone was celebrating. Elder Kethver of the Archive Worlds had studied human history as part of his research into developing civilizations. What he had learned troubled him deeply. "This is not how humans behave when they are defeated," he told his assistant while reviewing old files in the deep archives beneath the planet's surface. "When humans lose a conflict, they argue, they protest. They make noise and demand justice. They do not simply walk away in silence." His assistant, a younger archivist named Keldum, looked up from the historical records they were reviewing. Perhaps they have finally learned wisdom. Perhaps they understand that some battles cannot be won. Kethver shook his ancient head. His species lived for thousands of years, and he had seen the rise and fall of many civilizations. No, young. 1. When humans become quiet, it means they are thinking. And when humans think about war, the galaxy should be afraid. The economic effects of humanity's withdrawal became apparent within months. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly had no human ships to maintain them. The humans had been reliable partners, always delivering goods on time, and handling the complex logistics of interstellar commerce with quiet efficiency. Now those routes were closing. Species that had depended on human trade networks found themselves scrambling to establish new partnerships. Prices for manufactured goods began to rise as the efficient, human production centers stopped exporting to galactic markets. On the industrial world of Proxima Beta, factory owner Zekmuth watched his production lines slow as human-designed equipment broke down without replacement parts. The humans had always provided excellent technical support, sending engineers and spare components whenever needed. Now his requests for assistance went unanswered. 6 months, he told his plant supervisor. 6 months, and we will have to shut down half our operations. The humans were the only ones who understood these systems. Similar problems arose across the galaxy. Human technology had become so integrated into galactic civilization that its sudden absence created countless small crises. Communications networks struggled without human maintenance protocols. Shipping schedules collapsed without human coordination software. Even medical facilities found themselves short of supplies as human pharmaceutical companies stopped accepting orders. The Alteran Council was among the first to recognize the true implications of humanity's silence. Counselor Nexhai called an emergency session after reviewing reports from across Alteran space. The humans are not running away, he announced to the gathered representatives. They are preparing for something. All of their people, all of their resources, all of their attention has been pulled back to human space. This is not retreat, this is mobilization. One of the younger counselors disagreed. Mobilization for what? They have no enemies. The hegemony simply wants to redistribute some colonies. No one threatens human survival? Nexhai pulled up star charts showing human territory. Red indicators marked the locations where long-range sensors had detected unusual activity. Look at these energy readings. Industrial activity has increased by 300% in human systems. New construction projects are appearing on worlds that were previously classified as agricultural or residential. They are building something, and they are building it in secret. The evidence was subtle but consistent. Human merchant vessels had stopped carrying passengers from other species, claiming scheduling difficulties that never seemed to resolve. Human colonies that had once welcomed tourists and researchers now politely declined all visitors, citing internal security reviews that had no end date. Most disturbing of all, the few alien residents living in human space had begun leaving. They cited personal reasons or family emergencies, but the pattern was clear. Non-humans were being encouraged to leave human territory, quietly but firmly. Dr. Amy Foster, a Centaurian xenobiologist who had worked closely with human research teams, tried to warn her government about what she had observed. Humans do not behave this way under normal circumstances, she reported. They are social beings who value cooperation and communication. This silence is completely contrary to their nature. Her superiors dismissed her concerns. Perhaps they are finally growing up, the science minister replied, learning to mind their own business instead of interfering in galactic affairs. But Amy had studied human psychology extensively. She knew that when humans stopped talking, it usually meant they were preparing to act. And human actions, when they finally came, tended to be decisive. On Earth itself, Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of Fleet Headquarters, watching status reports from across human space. Every colony was responding to the recall order. Every human citizen was returning home or preparing to do so. The greatest peaceful withdrawal in galactic history was proceeding exactly as planned. "Ma'am," her aide reported, Senator Clark, from Andromeda has tried to contact you 17 times. He seems genuinely concerned about the situation." Kate nodded but did not change her orders. "Continue standard protocols. All communication through official channels only." She understood why Paul was worried. He was a good man, and he had tried to support humanity in the assembly. But friendship could not change the reality of what was coming. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humanity would live with the consequences. In the deep space monitoring stations scattered throughout human territory, long-range sensors continued their patient watch. They had detected the first signs 18 months ago, faint energy signatures from the void between galaxies. The readings were getting stronger. Each day, the galaxy thought humanity was running away in defeat. They did not understand that humanity was preparing for war against something far worse than political disagreement, something that would make the hegemony's territorial ambitions seem like children's games, but that revelation would come later. For now, the galaxy would have to learn to live without humanity's help. They would discover what they had lost only when it was too late to get it back. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was learning what peace without peacekeepers looked like. The first major conflict erupted in the Tau Ceti sector when the Hegemony Coalition decided to claim mining rights on worlds belonging to the smaller Meridian Union. In the past, human mediators would have stepped in within days, organizing talks and finding compromise solutions that left everyone reasonably satisfied. Now there was no one to call when disputes arose, no neutral voice to calm heated arguments between species. The Meridian Union had little choice but to fight back. Their small defense fleet engaged hegemony warships in a battle that lasted 3 days and left thousands dead on both sides. The conflict spread as allied species were drawn into the fighting, each seeking to protect their own interests. Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Republic watched the reports from his office on the capital world. His species had always relied on human diplomacy to maintain their trade agreements and territorial boundaries. Now those agreements were being challenged by more aggressive neighbors who saw opportunity in the power vacuum. "Sir," his aide reported, "the Vegan Confederation is demanding access to our shipping routes. They claim the old treaties are no longer valid since humans are not here to enforce them." Veltar rubbed his forehead with long, thin fingers. "And if we refuse? They have moved 3 battle groups to our border. They seem prepared to take the routes by force if necessary." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as old grievances resurfaced and long-suppressed ambitions came into the open. Species that had lived in relative harmony for decades suddenly found themselves on the edge of war as the careful balance of power that humans had helped maintain collapsed. The economic situation grew worse each month. Without human trade networks, many worlds could no longer obtain essential supplies. Food shortages appeared on planets that had become dependent on human agricultural exports. Medical supplies ran low as human pharmaceutical companies remained silent and unreachable. On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, riots broke out when unemployment reached 30%. The factories that had produced goods for human markets stood empty, their workers left with no jobs and no hope of finding new ones quickly. Dr. Amy Foster stood before the emergency council of her homeworld, trying to make them understand what was really happening. She had spent years studying human behavior and culture, and everything about their withdrawal troubled her deeply. "This is not how humans respond to political defeat," she explained to the assembled representatives. "When humans lose a diplomatic battle, they argue their case louder, they appeal to higher authorities, they organize protests and public campaigns. They do not simply disappear." Councillor Rethka, an elderly member who had served for 40 years, leaned forward in his chair. "Perhaps they have finally learned wisdom. Perhaps they understand that some fights cannot be won." Amy shook her head firmly. "No, sir, I have studied their history extensively. Humans do not abandon causes they believe in. When they withdraw like this, it means they are preparing for something much larger than a territorial dispute." "Preparing for what?" another counselor asked. "I do not know," Amy admitted. But whatever it is, it requires every human in the galaxy to return home. It requires complete secrecy and massive industrial mobilization. These are not the actions of a defeated species. These are the actions of a species preparing for war. The Council dismissed her concerns, as most governing bodies had done when presented with similar warnings. The humans were gone, the galaxy was moving on. And that was the end of it. But deep in the archive worlds, Elder Kethfer was making a disturbing discovery. While researching the historical patterns of extinct civilizations, he had found references to an ancient threat that had once swept through their galaxy like a plague. The records were fragmentary, scattered across dozens of worlds and written in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. But the pattern that emerged made his ancient blood run cold. The Devourers, he whispered to himself as he pieced together the evidence. They called them the Devourers. According to the scattered accounts, they had appeared without warning 3 millennia ago, emerging from the dark space between galaxies in ships that defied understanding. They consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all life and resources. Before moving on to the next target, the galactic civilizations of that time had tried to fight them using conventional warfare and had failed completely. The Devourers seemed immune to most weapons and showed no interest in negotiation or surrender. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished back into the void between galaxies, leaving behind only dead worlds and fragmented records of their passage. Kethfer checked the dates carefully, comparing the ancient records with current galactic chronology. If the pattern held, if the Devourers returned on a regular cycle, then they were due to appear again very soon. He tried to bring his findings to the Galactic Assembly, but the current political chaos made it impossible to get anyone's attention. The various species were too busy fighting each other over trade routes and territory to listen to warnings about ancient threats. Meanwhile, long-range sensors throughout the galaxy began detecting strange anomalies in deep space. Ships that ventured too far from established trade routes sometimes failed to return, simply vanishing without sending distress signals. The few automated probes that survived reported brief contact with massive objects moving through the outer darkness, but the data was always corrupted and incomplete. Most disturbing of all, the monitoring stations that watched the borders of human space had gone completely silent. Not destroyed or damaged, simply silent. No signals went in or out of human territory, as if an invisible wall had been erected around their entire civilization. Commander Lisa Parker stood on the observation deck of the Deep Space Station Guardian 7, watching the last supply convoy return from the Outer Rim. Her orders were clear. All human assets were to be pulled back to the inner systems immediately. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we are receiving distress calls from the Vega sector. Meridian Union forces are requesting assistance with evacuation of civilian populations." Lisa felt a pang of sympathy for the aliens who had been caught up in the spreading conflicts. Many of them were good people who had worked alongside humans for years, but her orders left no room for exceptions. "Continue radio silence," she commanded. "All stations are to maintain communication blackout until further notice." She watched the stars beyond the viewport and wondered if the other species would understand when the truth finally came out. Humanity had not abandoned them out of spite or anger. They had withdrawn to prepare for something that would threaten every living being in the galaxy. The early warning systems, hidden throughout human space, had been tracking the approaching threat for 18 months now. The energy signatures were getting stronger, the trajectory calculations more certain. The Devourers were coming, and they would arrive within the year. When that happened, the galaxy would learn why humanity had spent 2 years in silence. They would discover what their reliable peacekeepers had become when forced to prepare for total war. But first, the other species would have to survive long enough to see it. And with each passing day, as their conflicts escalated and their unity crumbled, that survival seemed less and less certain. The galaxy had chosen to reject humanity's partnership, and now they would face the consequences alone. At least until humanity decided it was time to return. The first sign of the real threat came from the Outer Rim monitoring stations. Lieutenant Commander Rick Campbell was finishing his night shift at Luna Base's Deep Space Surveillance Center when the alarms began screaming. The massive displays that covered the walls of the command center lit up with red warnings as sensors detected something impossible. "Sir," called Ensign Mary Coleman from her station, "we have multiple contacts emerging from deep space. The energy signatures are off the charts." Rick moved to her console and stared at the readings. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. The objects were massive, bigger than any ship or space station ever built, and they were moving at speeds that should have been impossible for something so large. "How many?" he asked quietly. Mary's hands flew over her controls as she tried to get an accurate count. "I am showing at least 50 contacts, sir. Maybe more. The interference is making it hard to get clear readings." Rick activated the emergency communication system that connected directly to Fleet Command on Earth. Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the screen within seconds, and he could see she was already in the command center despite the early "Our report," she said simply. "Ma'am, we have contact. Multiple large objects emerging from the void between galaxies, bearing directly for the Outer Rim colonies. Energy signatures match the profiles from the ancient records." Kate's expression did not change, but Rick could see her hands tighten on the arms of her chair. They had been expecting this for months, but seeing it actually happen was still a shock. "Initiate Protocol 7 immediately," she ordered. "All stations are to begin full-spectrum monitoring and prepare for emergency broadcast." Across human space, similar scenes played out as monitoring stations detected the approaching fleet. The objects were not trying to hide their presence now, broadcasting energy signatures that could be detected from halfway across the galaxy on the archive worlds. Elder Kethver felt his worst fears confirmed as his sensors picked up the same readings. He immediately activated the emergency council system, calling together every senior member of his species for an unprecedented meeting. "They have returned," he announced to the assembled crowd of archivists. "The Devourers are coming back." The chamber erupted in worried conversations as the implications sank in. Several younger archivists demanded to know why they had not been warned sooner, but Kethver simply displayed the fragmentary historical records he had pieced together. "I tried to warn the Galactic Assembly," he said sadly. "They were too busy fighting over human colonies to listen." Meanwhile, the approaching fleet had reached the edge of civilized space. The first contact came at Outpost Delta 7, a small research station on the rim of hegemony territory. The station's commander sent out standard first contact protocols, broadcasting messages of greeting in 43 different languages. The response was swift and terrible. The research station simply vanished, its destruction so complete that not even debris remained. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. As if it had never existed at all. Similar fates befell the next dozen outposts and colonies that tried to establish contact. The pattern was always the same, greeting messages followed by total annihilation. No survivors, no warnings, no explanations. The Devourers were not interested in communication. Dr. Amy Foster was in an emergency meeting with her government when the news reached the Centauri Republic. The reports from the Outer Rim were fragmentary and confused, but the pattern was clear. Something was systematically destroying everything in its path. "We need to contact the humans," Amy said urgently. "If this is what they were preparing for, they might know how to fight these things." "The humans have maintained complete silence for 2 years," replied the defense minister. "Even if we could reach them, why would they help us after we supported the territorial seizures?" Amy stood up from her chair, frustration clear in her voice. "Because that is what humans do. When faced with extinction, they put aside their differences and fight for everyone's survival. That is their nature." She was right, but proving it would be difficult. All attempts to contact human space continued to meet with automated responses or complete silence. The communication blackout that humanity had maintained was absolute, but then something unexpected happened. As panic spread throughout the galaxy, and species began to realize the scope of the threat, A message appeared on every communication network simultaneously. It was broadcast on all frequencies and all languages. Impossible to ignore or block. The message was simple and came from Admiral Kate Sullivan herself. She appeared on screens across the galaxy wearing her full dress uniform and speaking from what appeared to be a military command center. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "You are facing a threat that your civilizations have not seen for 3,000 years. The entities approaching. Your worlds are called devours, and they cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or appeased." She paused to let that information sink in before continuing. "Humanity detected their approach 18 months ago. Since that time, we have been preparing for war. Not war against you, but war against them." And the message continued with technical details about the Devourer fleet, their capabilities, and their likely targets. But the most important part came at the end. "Any species willing to set aside past differences and fight for survival is welcome to join us. We will not abandon any world that asks for our help, regardless of previous political disagreements. Send your representatives to the coordinates that follow this message." The coordinates led to a system on the edge of human space that had been marked as uninhabited on all galactic surveys. But when the first alien ships arrived there, they found something that took their breath away. Commander Veltar of the Centauri Republic was among the first to reach the rendezvous point, and what he saw made him understand why humanity had been so quiet for 2 years. The empty system was full of ships, thousands of them, arranged in defensive formations around massive space stations that had not existed on any previous surveys, but these were not the human vessels that the galaxy remembered. These ships were larger, more advanced, and carried weapons that seemed to bend space itself around them. The humans had not just been preparing for war, they had been transforming themselves into something new. A human officer appeared on his communication screen, a woman with short blonde hair and captain's insignia. "Commander Veltar, this is Captain Jennifer Adams of the Human Defense Force. Admiral Martinez is expecting you aboard the command station." As Veltar's ship was guided to a docking bay, he could see construction continuing on dozens of platforms throughout the system. Humans and their automated systems were working around the clock to complete preparations for what was clearly going to be the largest military operation in galactic history. The docking bay was huge, easily large enough to hold a dozen ships. His size. As he disembarked, Veltar was met by human soldiers in armor he did not recognize. Carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, they escorted him through corridors that seemed to pulse with life, past rooms full of equipment that looked more grown than manufactured. The humans had clearly made advances in technology that went far beyond anything the rest of the galaxy had achieved. Admiral John Martinez was waiting in a command center that overlooked the entire fleet. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, but his handshake was firm and his smile was genuine. "Commander," he said simply, "welcome to humanity's answer to extinction." Through the massive windows of the command center, Veltar could see the full scope of what humanity had built in 2 years of silence. It was not just a fleet, it was an entire civilization dedicated to warfare on a scale that made previous galactic conflicts look like children's games. "How?" Veltar asked quietly. Martinez looked out at the ships and stations that filled the system. "When you have 18 months to prepare for the end of everything, you find ways to do the impossible." The battle for the Kepler Nexus began at dawn on a Tuesday that would be remembered across the galaxy for thousands of years. The Devourer fleet had swept through 16 star systems in 3 weeks, consuming everything in their path and leaving behind empty space where entire civilizations had once thrived. Now they approached the Nexus, a critical junction where 7 major trade routes met. If the Nexus fell, the inner systems would be cut off from each other, making coordinated defense impossible. The fate of every species in the galaxy would be decided here. Admiral John Martinez stood on the bridge of the flagship, UES Defiance, watching the tactical displays as the enemy fleet approached. The Devourer ships were massive, each one larger than a human city, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light itself. There were over 200 of them, moving in perfect formation like a swarm of deadly insects. "All ships report ready for battle," announced Commander Lisa Parker from her position at the communications console. She had been promoted after her exemplary work at the outer monitoring stations, and Martinez trusted her completely. The human fleet was smaller, only 87 ships compared to the enemy's massive force. But these were not the same vessels that had patrolled galactic space 2 years ago. Every ship had been rebuilt from the ground up using technology that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. "Signal the Allied forces," Martinez ordered. "All species formations are to maintain their assigned positions until we engage the primary targets." The response came from a dozen different species, each contributing what ships they could spare to the desperate defense. The Alterans had sent their entire home fleet. The Centauri Republic had stripped their border defenses to join the battle. Even some Hegemony Coalition vessels were present, their crews finally understanding what really mattered. Captain Jennifer Adams was aboard the destroyer UES Thunderbolt, leading a squadron of the new attack ships. Each vessel was equipped with weapons that could tear holes in space itself, powered by reactors that used principles discovered during humanity's frantic research program. "Devourer fleet is entering weapons range," reported her tactical officer. "Energy signatures are spiking across their formation." Jennifer gripped her command chair as the first enemy salvo reached them. The Devourer weapons were unlike anything in galactic experience, beams of pure destruction that could unmake matter at the atomic level. Several alien vessels simply ceased to exist as the beams touched them, but the human ships were ready. Energy shields that bent space around each vessel deflected most of the incoming fire, while point defense systems that moved faster than thought destroyed the projectiles that got through. "All ships, execute Pattern Delta," Martinez broadcast across the fleet. "Remember, we are not just fighting for ourselves today." The human formation split into 3 groups, each moving with precision that seemed impossible for such large vessels. The ships accelerated to speeds that should have torn them apart, their crews protected by inertial dampening systems that had been theoretical just 2 years ago. The first group, led by Captain Mike Roberts aboard the cruiser U.S. Vengeance, struck at the enemy's left flank. Their weapons carved through Devourer shields like they were made of paper, sending massive explosions rippling through the alien formation. The second group attacked from above, diving down onto the enemy fleet with their weapons blazing. Commander Sarah Blake, piloting the battleship UES Retribution, led her ships in a coordinated strike that destroyed 6 Devourer vessels in less than 30 seconds, but the third group, led by Martinez himself, had the most dangerous mission. They drove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, targeting the massive command ship that directed the Devourer swarm. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Don Walsh from his sensor station, "the command ship is generating some kind of field." "It is affecting our electronics," Martinez nodded grimly. The Devourers had weapons beyond simple destruction. They could corrupt technology itself, turning advanced systems against their users. This was why so many previous civilizations had fallen to them, but humanity had prepared for this too. Every human ship carried backup systems that used older, simpler technology. When their advanced computers failed, they switched to mechanical controls and manual targeting. When their energy weapons stopped working, they fired projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. "Signal all human vessels," Martinez commanded. "Switch to emergency protocols, fight like our ancestors did." Across the human fleet, crews began operating their ships using methods that would have been familiar to naval officers from Earth's ancient oceans. They calculated firing solutions by hand, communicated with signal flags when radios failed, and relied on human judgment instead of computer assistance. The Devourers had expected their technology corruption to cripple the defenders, but humans had learned to fight without depending entirely on their machines. Where other species would have been helpless, humanity adapted and continued fighting. The battle raged for 6 days and nights. The space around the Kepler nexus became a graveyard of shattered ships and floating debris. The Devourers fought with the fury of a force that had never known defeat, but humanity fought with something the enemy could not understand, the desperate courage of a species protecting everything it loved. On the fourth day, Captain Jennifer Adams led a suicide run against one of the largest Devourer vessels. Her destroyer was crippled and her crew reduced to half strength, but she managed to ram her ship into the enemy's reactor core. The explosion tore a hole in space itself, taking out 3 more Devourer ships in the process. By the 6th day, the tide had turned. The human fleet had taken terrible losses, with less than half their original ships still operational. But the Devourer formation was broken, their command structure shattered. Their seemingly unstoppable advance finally halted. Admiral Martinez stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship, watching as the surviving Devourer ships began to retreat toward the dark space between galaxies. His uniform was torn and stained, his face marked by exhaustion, but his eyes still burned with determination. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships are to pursue and destroy any Devourer vessel attempting to escape. We end this here." The final phase of the battle was more hunt than combat. Human ships, working alongside their alien allies, tracked down the fleeing Devourers and eliminated them one by one. No quarter was given, no mercy shown. This enemy had consumed entire worlds, and they would not be allowed to return. When the last Devourer ship was destroyed, a strange silence fell over the battlefield. For the first time in weeks, space was quiet except for the sound of rescue operations and damage control efforts. Commander Lisa Parker established communication with the surviving Allied vessels. Species that had been fighting each other just months ago now worked together to rescue survivors and tend to the wounded. The shared experience of facing extinction had changed them all. "Admiral," she reported to Martinez, "we are receiving messages from across the galaxy. Every major species is requesting immediate diplomatic contact." Martinez nodded slowly. The battle was won, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and humanity would make sure it was not wasted. 3 months later, Jake Morrison once again stood before the Galactic Assembly. But this time, the chamber was different. The seats were arranged in a circle with humanity's delegation at the center, and every species representative listened with respectful attention. "The threat is ended," Jake announced to the gathered delegates. "The Devourers will not return in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes. But the galaxy must be prepared for the day when they come again." This time, when humanity spoke about cooperation and mutual defense, every voice in the assembly voted yes. They had learned what happened when they tried to face the universe alone. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating the quiet species that preferred diplomacy to war. Because now they understood that when humanity walked away in silence, it meant something terrible was coming. And when humanity returned, it meant salvation had arrived.